incredible, unimaginably good, glorious love and grace. This rich, rich grace of Jesus Christ. This is an incredible letter. And last week, my wife Alice spoke, and she was looking at how Paul got to the point, this is in chapter 5, where he is encouraging the church, and therefore us, to walk in this faith, to walk in love, to walk in light, and to walk in wisdom. And towards the end of the letter, it starts to talk about wisdom. It starts to talk about, right, what is it to actually live the Christian life? There's some really specific guidance and wisdom on what it is to live the Christian life. And actually, we looked at this a couple of months ago. James, our senior pastor, the guy whooping at the front, I'm sorry about that, I can't control him. There it is. When we had our series, which was called Discipleship and Our Sexual Formation, we did a whole talk on marriage. And marriage is the first thing that the Apostle Paul looks at in terms of wisdom and guidance on how to live the Christian life. And the key verse in all of the wisdom is this. It should appear behind me on the screens. It's Ephesians, it's chapter 5, verse 21. It says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another. This idea of we are all mutually submitted to each other. Why? Because we are all equal under Christ. That's really, really important. And all the wisdom is about this mutual submission, because we are all equal under Christ. And in chapter 5, the Apostle Paul applies that to marriage. And I really encourage you, if you haven't heard that talk, go back and listen to it. It's on our website. And then it moves on. Tonight we're in the first part of chapter 6. And chapter 6 is all about children and parents. Children and parents. And it's this idea, again, of in our households, in our family life, everything comes in reverence under the lordship of Jesus. And this is what it says. If you've got a Bible, grab it now. If you don't worry. It don't appear on the screen behind me. I'll read it. This is just the first 4 verses of chapter 6. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So before I go any further, let me just acknowledge a few things, because I don't want there to be any elephants in the room. So we're looking tonight at children and parents. Now, some of us in the room are parents, myself included. A lot of us in the room are not parents. We may have some grandparents in the room. We may have some godparents in the room. We may have some people in the room who are not biological parents, but they are foster carers. We may have people in the room who are not parents, but you are dedicated members of either the Vineyard kids or youth teams. If that's you, first off, you're a legend. And secondly, I hear there's an extra special big room in heaven for you. Forms for how you can get involved in that team are on the welcome list. Joking aside, our kids and youth teams are heroes. They are magnificent and we love them. You may be in the room, you're not a parent, but you are a dedicated aunt or uncle. You may not be a parent, but you are a dedicated godparent. You are not a parent, but you feel a specific calling in your life to be a spiritual mother or a spiritual father to young people. So my heart for this talk, and I hope the wisdom that comes out of looking at this passage in this letter to the Ephesians, is that there is something for everyone in the room. Because what the writer Paul shows us here is it's all about the way we care for our young people and build each other up and how we nurture them. And whether that's in nuclear families, whether that's kind of biological kind of families, households, or whether that's our wider church family across all sites. Because that is the context that this letter is written in. It's really important. When we think of the church in Ephesus, how do we think of that church? How do we picture it in our mind? Because the reality is the early church, like the one in Ephesus, was known to be a real mix. It would have had husbands and wives and children in it, but it also would have had widows, widowers. It would have had slaves and servants. It would have had slave children in it. It would have had adopted children. It definitely would have had adopted children in it. But at the time, nearly 2,000 years ago, the practice of infanticide, i.e. the idea, awfully and just horribly, the idea of leaving babies outside to die of exposure was commonplace. And the early church was known for whether it was married couples or whether it was singles, people who would rescue babies, bring them in and adopt them. So there would likely to have been adopted children in this church in Ephesus. This church was a real mix, just like our church is today. So this part of the letter in Ephesians isn't just for mums and dads in the room. It really is for everyone. I also just want to acknowledge my context as I've prepared this talk and give it tonight. First thing to say is I am a dad. If you don't know me, I am a dad. I'm married to Alice, and we've got 2 boys. I've been a dad for nearly 12 years, and both my boys are the absolute apple of my eye. I love them, and I'm very, very proud of them. Also, starting in my late teens and throughout my 20s into my early 30s, I was involved continuously in youth ministry. I also worked professionally in both primary and secondary education. For many years, I worked in out-of-school provision, colloquially known as end of the line, which is a horrible way of putting it, but I worked with some incredibly vulnerable and volatile young people. I lived in London for a couple of years, where I headed up a youth community program for teenagers facing very tough, challenging life circumstances. I love children. I absolutely love young people. I always have. I know that the Lord has put a lifelong calling on me to carry this burden for the younger generations. And it's something that I kind of continue to push into, and it outworks itself in different ways in different seasons of my life. In the last couple of years, I've actually become a junior football coach. Something I probably take a bit too seriously. But for me, it's not about the football. It's just about the kids, and I love it. I share that with you because I know there are people in the room who you guys connect with children and young people in different ways. But the Lord speaks to us in different ways and in different seasons of our lives, doesn't he, about our heart for the next generation. I also want to acknowledge one other thing. That is, I grew up in an incredibly happy, stable family. I have incredible parents. I have a very healthy relationship with both my mum and dad. I did as a child. I continue to do so as a grown-up. That is something I am immensely grateful for. I love my parents dearly. But I also know that in a room like this, that's not likely to be the case for everyone. I know that sometimes relationships between parents and children across all the different stages of life can be tough, if not dysfunctional, and at worst they can be destructive. And I know there are few things closer to our hearts in life than our relationships with those who brought us into the world. So, as we look tonight at children and parents, it could be a tricky topic. So I just really want to acknowledge that. So let me just pray before we go any further. Lord, I just want to invite you right now into this moment and into our hearts. Lord, do whatever you want to do. Your kingdom come in this room. Lord, soften our hearts to hear from you through these words in Scripture. Amen. Okay, so let's go back into the passage. Starting at verse 1. Children. Let's stop there. Children. Let's pause straight away. We're one word in. This is massive. The Apostle Paul deliberately has carved out part of his letter to directly address children in the church of Ephesus. Imagine the scene. Perhaps this letter was read out to the whole gathered community. And you can picture it. The children in the room, their ears prick up. They're like, wow, there's a bit for us. You know, that thrill of getting a mention. They're like, wow, okay. Let's just acknowledge how significant this is. Society back then, 2,000 years ago, children had no standing at all. And yet this is a direct message to all the younger people in the room. Not only does Paul acknowledge that they exist, but he apportions part of his teaching to them. And he speaks to them first. He speaks to them before he speaks to the parents. Notice how he honors them in this moment. And also notice how he makes no distinction between any of them. There is no distinction between children of biological families, no distinction between maybe adopted children or slave children. It's to all the kids, and his message is clear. He says to them, you are called to a higher level of living. You are called to a life in Christ. And as he does that, he encourages them to obey the parents. It says this, doesn't it? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Now, at first glance, when we read that, that can look quite strict and controlling, can't it? Obey your parents. Do as you're told. But actually, when you place this in the wider context of the letter, what we can actually see is that Paul is giving the young people incredible dignity and worth. Because remember what I said at the start, all of this wisdom teaching in this letter is set within the premise of mutual submission. The idea that we are all equal, children and parents, because we all come under the lordship of Jesus. Paul is saying to the kids in the room, you have a choice. You can take action. You have agency in this. And he is saying to them, you have worth. It's not that your parents have any more worth than you, but because we all belong to Jesus and we're all coming under his lordship, follow this instruction. And you can ask Jesus to help you with this. Paul, he quotes the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are obviously based in the Old Testament. You can find those in either Exodus chapter 20 or Deuteronomy chapter 5. He quotes the fifth commandment, which is the first commandment with a specific promise. I read it here. This is Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long, and then it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you. He's saying, do this, that all may go well with you. Have a life of blessing and of favour. He's not saying it will be a trouble-free life, because that isn't the reality of any life, Christian life or not. But again, he is saying to this, root yourself in Christ. Root yourself in the teaching of Christ. Root yourself in God. Then, as we move on, Paul speaks to fathers. Just jumping down to the next passage. Fathers. Fathers, again, let's stop there. One word, fathers, because you might be thinking, well, okay, so is this just for fathers? Is this just for the dads? The answer to that is kind of yes and no. Because in some ways, what Paul is doing here is he is directly addressing dads. He is saying that you do have a unique role to play with your young people. So yes, it is for the fathers. But in other ways, it isn't just for fathers. Because due to the cultural context that Paul is writing in, fathers were very much seen as the head of the household. So what we can do here is we can actually read that it's for the mums and the dads together. And in fact, as I said earlier, really what we can see is this is for anyone who's got a heart for or is involved with raising young people. Anyone who is nurturing children. He says this, fathers or everyone, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So, folks, do not exasperate your children. Exasperate is such a great word, isn't it? It's one of my favourite words. It sits in that kind of little, alongside kind of exaggerate and accentuate, all those kind of words. I love the word exasperate. I try not to do it, but, I do love the word. He's saying to guys, isn't he? Don't drive your kids crazy. Don't drive them crazy. Don't get them going around in circles. Don't lead them on a path to nowhere. Instead, bring them up in a different way. Choose a different path. Now, in the ancient world, like I say, nearly 2,000 years ago, fathers would have had carte blanche on how they treated children and how they disciplined them. And really, in that society, fathers were encouraged to discipline kids and, if it required it, to be as harsh as they needed to be. So, again, what we're seeing from the writer Paul here is something that's radical and very countercultural. The culture of the time would have said to kids, right, do not provoke your parents. Do not provoke them to anger. And parents, you can do whatever you think is necessary. Do whatever's required. But Paul is saying that in the church in Ephesus and in all the church, including our church today, there is no space for harshness towards children. Instead, we are to treat young ones the way that Jesus would. That is to create a safe space that shows full value and dignity and worth and love and sensitivity and care. We are not to dominate, bully, or demean them. Because, like I said, children had no value or worth in the society. I don't know if you've ever seen like a documentary or studied something like Pompeii, which is this perfectly enshrined kind of snapshot, isn't it, of Greco-Roman times. All of the evidence that's been discovered there points to some truly awful practices for young people and slaves. Practices, where just abuse and exploitation and enslavement were absolutely rife. And these would be practices that, as we look back with our Western kind of enlightened perspective, they just are deeply troubling and really problematic. And yet in those times, what we would see as a problem was actually the point. For those in higher society, the more you abused or exploited a young person was actually a status symbol. It gave you more standing. Yet the Bible here, written in ancient times, tells a very different story, whether that's the Old Testament, where we see the Mosaic Law, which was all about protecting children and the most vulnerable in society, or whether it's the words of the Apostle Paul in this letter to the church in Ephesus, what we see is a value placed on young people. That is a stark contrast to the culture of the time. And that's true for us now, today, in 2024. We, as a church, give children and young people the highest value. I mean, there's so much I could say about this tonight, but let me just emphasize two things. Firstly, we believe that all young people should be safe and protected from harm. You're probably familiar with the word and the concept of safeguarding. Well, we take safeguarding of children, young people, and vulnerable adults incredibly seriously in this church. We are 100% committed to safeguarding. And what that means as a church is that we have a duty together to promote the welfare of our children and young people. It means that we work together to prevent abuse from happening, and that we seek to protect those that are most at risk of being abused. The welfare of our children and young people is always paramount. And it might be just at a technical level, you're like, oh, I want to know more about that. I want to say is on our website, on the footer of every page of our website, there is a link to our safeguarding section. So if you want more details on that, we also have a safeguarding team led by Amanda Mahoney. You can email the safeguarding team if you've ever got questions or you want to see our safeguarding policy. It's there for you to see. So we do want all of our children and young people in this church to be safe. The second thing is this. We believe that our children and young people are on an equal footing when it comes to us, the grown-ups, when it comes to being called disciples of Jesus. We see our young people and our kids as same as us. They are empowered by the Spirit. They are carriers of his kingdom, and they get to do the stuff that we do everywhere, every day. Age is no barrier. Our kids get to do exactly what we get to do. They get to worship, they get to pray for healing, they get to prophesy, they get to share the gospel of Jesus, they get to invite those yet to come, they get to play their part in restoring the city and renewing the nation, and they get to live a life dedicated to learning what it is to live like Jesus. They get to be with him, and they get to do the things that he did. If we have a vision for our children any less than that, then we are doing them a disservice. So let's never sell our young people short by thinking that the Lord has less for them than he does for us. This passage makes it really clear that the way to bring them up is to bring them up in the way of the Lord. To bring them up by discipling them and to show them the way of Jesus. And there's a challenge in here, isn't there, for any parent or anyone involved in nurturing children. What are we doing in the spiritual formation of our children? Are we raising them in the ways of the Lord, or are we subconsciously or intentionally outsourcing it? Or are we just like passively letting this one slide by? Is it something we're like, oh, we're going to get to that later? Just don't get me wrong, I know that this can go badly wrong. What happens sometimes is people see passages like this, and they're like, right, going to get stuck in. We roll up our sleeves, and we go really heavy with the discipleship. We see it and we're like, right, boy, we are going to raise our kids in the way of the Lord. Son, daughter, young person in your life, let me tell you about Jesus. Let me make sure you are a Christian. I'm going to make sure that you are reading your Bible. I'm going to make sure that you are praying your prayers. I'm going to make sure you're on the right path. What happens is we see the passage talks about training and instruction, and we end up overly focusing on the instruction. We over-egg the cake. We go too big, we go too heavy, because we have this deep-seated anxiety that a child or children in our lives won't grow up in the ways of the Lord. So we overcorrect and we shove our faith down their throats. You might be in the room tonight, and actually you might have been on the other side of that. You may even be on the other side of that right now. This is obviously and sadly counterproductive. Funnily enough, kids and young people aren't robots. You can't just program them to believe what we want them to believe. We can't program them to think what we want them to think. We can't program them to behave exactly the way we want them to behave. What happens with this approach is that it seldom leads to a child actually owning their own faith. What might have happened is they've had a lot of stuff drummed into their head, but it's never permeated their heart or their soul. They've never owned it. They've never had that moment where they're like, what do I actually think about Jesus? What do I actually think is the meaning of life? It reminds me of something like this, which is a scene that many parents of young children have seen. The parent's voice is this: you need to eat this banana. This banana is really good for you. Eat it. You should eat it. Why don't you want to eat it? Seriously, eat the banana. I eat bananas. I like them. They're healthy. I know best. Eat the banana. What's the kid thinking? I'm not sure about the banana. Funnily enough, I think I'd rather try the banana on my own terms. I think I'll eat it when I want to eat it, if I want to eat it. Let me see what it tastes like. Let me see whether I mind the texture of it. I'm still not sure about this banana idea. There's a great passage in the Message in the Message translation. Oh dear. Sorry about that. There's a great passage in the Message translation. The Message translation is just a lovely contemporary kind of version of the Bible. It says this in the same verse: fathers, or like I say, anyone involved in nurturing children, take your children by the hand and lead them in the way of the master. Take them by the hand. What would it look like in our lives for us, with our young people and our children, to take them gently by the hand rather than shoving it down their throats? Because what we can do is we can model something. We can demonstrate something different. We can infuse them with a different way of living. The way of the Lord, which is beautiful. It is full of joy, hope, and peace. We can live as parents and those that care for children in a way that the love of Jesus just overflows out of us. And we can show it to our children in the big and in the small. Let me give you an example. Let me ask. Have you ever apologized to a child? Have you ever said sorry to a young person? Have you ever taken responsibility for a mistake that you've made? Have you ever owned that with them and in front of them? Have you humbled yourself in front of a younger person? Have you said to them, can you please show me some grace and forgiveness? Because I am sorry. Just think what you sow in a young person in their most formative years when you do this. Or maybe differently. When was the last time that you showed something to a young person that was just brave and courageous and filled with faith? When was the last time you showed them something of the kingdom? When was the last time you showed them that we are all, them included, called to something so much bigger than their young hearts and minds can ever see? That they have a cause to live for. And what do you say to a child when they ask you one of the questions that only kids can ask? Kids do ask the best questions. Kids ask questions that get right to the heart of God. What do we say? Are we ready for them? What do we say when we're with a young person? They say, why is that person homeless? And what are we going to do about it? What do we say to our young people when they say, I'm worried about the climate crisis, and why are the grown-ups not doing anything about it? What do we say to our young people when they say, why has someone detonated a bomb? Or why is that country attacking that other country? What do we say to them when they say, what happens to someone when they die? Or they say, what does heaven look like? Kids ask the best questions. They reflect the heart of God. And are we ready for all the challenges of raising young people in 2024? Not just, the reaction to what they do when they have a tantrum in the supermarket, but when we need to have a conversation about using a smartphone or going on social media or going to a sleepover. It could be many things. In these moments, our values and our guiding principles are vital. What values are we embodying as we raise our young people? If you haven't already, I really encourage you, take the time, consider this, pray through this. What are my guiding principles? Whether you're a parent or whether you're someone involved in raising young people. Who is it that you want to be? What is the Lord calling you to be like? Who is the Lord calling you to be in these moments? Let me give you some examples. Perhaps a guiding principle could be one of patience. Maybe it's all about patience. Your guiding principle is patience. You will choose to be patient rather than quick to judge or quick to anger. Perhaps the guiding principle is kindness. Perhaps it's to choose the path of softness and care over a path of harshness and conflict. Perhaps your guiding principle will be integrity. Perhaps it will be to parent or to care in the spirit of truth and honesty, and hold into a conviction when it would be easier just to go with the flow of all the other parents and contemporaries around you. Or when perhaps it would be easier just to tell your kids white lies to navigate a tricky situation. Perhaps your guiding principle is simply to be available, to be interruptible, to be involved. I heard a good thing recently, someone who said, we're not going to be perfect, but are we going to be present? Are we going to be present to our kids, and are we going to be present to Jesus as we raise them? There's also something here specifically for if you're in the room and you actually have kids in your household right now, or you regularly have kids in your life. What are the guiding principles that define your household? I was in a house just the other night, and I've seen this many times. I had a little picture on the wall. It said this, the passage from Joshua 24. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So let me ask you, is your household defined by the Lord? Are there tenets that you would return to and that underpin all of your decision making and how they influence your whole household life? Whether it's how you spend your money, whether it's how you eat together at the dinner table. My wife Alice and I, we do have family values. We have made a certain commitment to our kids in this sense. Now, I'm not sharing that with you because we are perfect, far from it. What I'm sharing with you is that we get things wrong all the time, and I think that's really important for you to hear that. But I do say, and I do put that challenge out about what are your values for your household, because you have to do the groundwork. The challenge of parenting and raising young people is so big, you have to do the groundwork. You can't just kind of make it up as you go along. Having family values and having household values are a key part of that. I'll give you an example. Recently, our eldest son, he's about to go to secondary school. So we are at that juncture that a lot of parents come to where it's like, well, he wants a smartphone. So do we give him a smartphone? It's a decision that we really thought about and really wrestled with, especially with all the kind of in the news, all the research about how destructive and harmful social media use and smartphone digital technology can be. At the same time, the school is essentially saying your kid needs to have a smartphone when they start. So what we did is we sought counsel from trusted friends, people who've gone ahead of us, people who've got older children, godly people who we love and we cherish their wisdom. We said to them, help. We got their wisdom. We got their wisdom on, right, what regulations can we put on a phone? They helped us set up parental controls on the phone, how to set clear boundaries. But not only did we do this, but when we did give the smartphone to our son, we sat him down and we did some ground rules with him, and we said, remember one of our values. And one of our values in our household is to be kind. And we said, we are giving you this phone to be kind. Use this phone, have fun with it, connect with people, but be kind. Be kind with it. And if we find out for any reason you're not being kind with it, there will be consequences. Because until you're older, that phone is actually our phone. We want you to have it, and we want you to enjoy it. But it can come back to us at any point. Be kind. To raise children in the Lord requires involvement, but it requires more than this. It requires intention. Again, let's remember what the writer Paul says. It involves both training and instruction. We cannot settle for a totally hands-off role. Never forget, if you have children in your life, you are still the parent. You are still the carer. You are still involved. It's very easy in society at the moment for people who look after children to become increasingly passive. Culture tells us that children are now fully empowered. They're totally emancipated. That as parents or carers, we can just check out. But I'm not sure that that is compatible with what it means to raise our children in the ways of the Lord. It does require intentionality. I find it helpful to ask, what do our children need? What do our young people need? What do they need from me? What do they need from us? What do they need from us as a church family? Here's a whole load of things I think they need. You could probably add to this list. They need to know that they are loved and that they are loved unconditionally. They need to have clear and enforced boundaries. They need to hear about Jesus, and they need to hear that God loves them. They need to hear that we are proud of them. They need to experience grace and mercy, and they need to be able to show forgiveness when they are asked for forgiveness. If you are here tonight and you're married, they need to see respect, honor, and love between the spouses. They need us all as grown-ups to be accountable. And they need us to be in integrity-building relationships and community. They need us as grown-ups to be growing as people and in our faith. Children need us to pray for them and with them. And they need us to encourage them to ask questions, not stifle doubt when they have it. We need to go on the journey of exploring faith with them and reassure them as they explore the meaning of life. That has implications for us as a church. What's the culture in this church that we want to set as we raise children in the way of the Lord? Well, first off, when it comes to parenting, let's avoid comparison. We're the kind of church where it really is okay to not have it all together. It really, thankfully for me, otherwise it would be a big problem. It really is okay. Let's not judge each other. When you see parents or carers in this church struggling, when you see someone on Vineyard, kids or youth on the team struggling, that's okay. We're all just giving it our best shot. There are inevitable ups and downs when it comes to raising children. In this church, be aware that any of your leaders, myself included, if they are parents first, pastors second. Please give us grace in that. In this church, let's not get defeated. Let's stay really positive about raising children. Let's support each other in it. Let us parent and care for young people from a place of discipleship to Jesus. To pass on Jesus to the next generation, we need to know Jesus well ourselves. We can only pass on what we know and what we have experienced. Our lives need to overflow into our young people. We need to come to church. Might sound really obvious. There's a guy on stage saying, come to church. What a surprise on a Sunday. But we need to come to church. We need to show our young people that we value worshiping together, that we love being part of Christian community, that we love to pray and worship together. We need to model that to our young people. Remember, there's a saying that things are caught, not taught. Well, with young people, my belief is they are caught and taught. Let's show them something and let's teach them something. In our church, we have that culture of, what is your role in this? What is your role? Not all of us are called to be mums and dads, but we are called to play our part in some way. Could you be part of a team? Could you mentor a young person? Could you serve in some way? And then finally, let's be humble in this. The culture we want around raising young people is that it is a humbling experience. It's really humbling. It's hard work, and we need the Lord's wisdom in it.